Welcome everyone, I'm Peter, and this is a special St. Patrick's Day tour. It's not St. Patrick's Day, but let's keep it our little secret. St. Patrick's Day is tomorrow. So as you'll know, there's a theme to this tour, and it's 20 graves, those with a connection to Ireland. Some fairly clear, some a bit more tenuous. So it's appropriate to have William here, because William and I, when students, with another guy, we would have travelled all around Ireland. So we did every county in Ireland. So I suppose that's where my interest in Ireland comes from. And so just before we start, just to introduce you to Jackie as well. Some of you have already met her, the legendary Jackie. Normally you have to be dead before people call you legendary, but Jackie's still very much alive and well, thankfully. So Jackie's tremendous researcher, and not just in here but also in Friars Bush, and now increasingly Castlereagh Presbyterian. And so that's the intros out of the way. Justin is filming it, so if you don't want to feature, it'll mainly be, sadly for me, it'll mainly feature me, but if you want to make sure that Justin doesn't get in the background, just have a quiet word with him and ask him to edit you out. So just before we start then, by way of introduction, about the cemetery itself. The cemetery itself opened in 1855, and this is a sketch of how it was to be. So you might see the original gates here, but it's a lot smaller than the original plans were. So this is 1855. And it's now 2 acres in size, but it was to be much bigger than that. So it's maybe only about a sixth of what it was originally planned to be. Yes, well. Thank you, my glamorous assistant, for your very appropriate prompt. So it was originally called Belfast Cemetery at Malone. It was only afterwards, after it was open a number of years in 1855, that it adopted the Balmoral Cemetery, which is better known as to this day. So now, as I say, about 2 acres, but you can see that it was to be a lot bigger. There's to be a little chapel or church in it, and there was a lot of these very fine obelisks, but they never came to pass. There are a number of obelisks, though, particularly one. But certainly it's a man called Roran Hugh Hanna, but it was only a fraction of what it was originally planned to be. So the Belfast Cemetery Malone turned into Balmoral Cemetery, and there's a number of rules. Again, it says Belfast Cemetery Malone on the top of it. So there's the 12 commandments here. There's 12 rules. It's generally known as a Presbyterian burying ground because it was co-founded by a number of Presbyterian ministers, 2 of whom are buried here. Henry Cook, I'll mention him. He's better known as the Black Man outside Inst. Anybody here go to Inst? Just me then, so I can slag Inst off till my heart's content. And also then a man called Joseph Mackenzie. Joseph Mackenzie is buried at the very end at that big white headstone there. And he was for 47 years the minister of Malone Presbyterian Church, which you can see that is there. So his family, or it was actually I think it was his wife's family, owned this land. And initially, Henry Cook and Reverend Joseph Mackenzie, were denied the use of, Sophie's yawning, it's not a good sign, they were denied the use of a churchyard at a Church of Ireland church. They weren't allowed to have their own, perform their own funerals, own a funeral service according to their beliefs. So they thought, well, okay, we'll show them. So they opened this place in 1855. So 14 years later then, in 1869, though, it all changed because Belfast City Council then, as the traditional graveyards such as Ballymacarrat in East Belfast, Shankill, very historic graveyard, Friars Bush and Clifton Street, they started to fill up. So we needed an area, a cross interdenominational area where folks from all three major religions, in no particular order, Protestant, Catholic and Jewish, would be buried. And so they identified land up off the Falls Road at an area called Glenalina. So then that was to be the burial ground for the masses as such. So the plans that were in place here then fell by the wayside to a degree because both City Cemetery and Milltown Cemetery kind of jumped them in popularity. It was to be for the three main religions when it opened in 1869, but the Catholic Church then, they decided that they wanted a Bishop Dorian. He decided he wanted the final veto on this place. So after he organised the building of an underground wall to separate the Protestant worms from the Catholic worms, then he actually bought land further on up the Falls Road on the other side of the road and it's now Milltown Cemetery. So say it had an impact on this place because then the plans then didn't expand as much as they should have, or they wanted to originally. So there's about 7,400 burials in here. We'll call it about 7,000 of them today. We'll call it about 20 of them today. But interestingly, in the 12 Commandments here, it's number 10. It says, ministers or clergymen of the various religious denominations shall be at liberty to officiate at the graves of persons of their own communion according to the forms and ceremonies of their respective churches and bodies. So in other words, whatever faith or background you were from, you could use this burying ground. But I say it's primarily, although not exclusively, Presbyterian. But we'll see a number of, for example, of Methodist ministers here. So there are folks from all denominations buried in here. So that's enough of the waffle intro. So we'll go to the first grave. I don't have too far to go to it because it's behind you. So like pantomime season. So it's the Kingan grave. And the connection to Ireland isn't particularly, it isn't obvious at all, but you'll see at about the middle, Thomas Davison Kingan, and he was a retired bachelor and a merchant, and he died on the 8th of July 1901 at the Shelburne Hotel in Dublin, and right on cue we've got the Dublin train going past. You see, this is all like clockwork. So that's the connection with Ireland, with this first stop. Kingan is a relatively, if the word Kingan, you can see it started without an H, and then the only person who is mentioned with an H is the Reverend John Kingan. So he's not buried there. He's actually buried in the City Cemetery, but he buried his first wife in this plot, Louisa. So you can see that there's no H at the top, and then as it goes down, then there's an H on the bottom. And the Reverend Kingan then, he founded the Deaf Institute in Botanic Avenue, so it's still there to this day, the Kingan Fellowship. So that's why the Kingan name then is kind of known even to this day, as I say, the churches in Botanic Avenue. So that's the first one. I don't have too far to go to the second one. This is the Young grave, and it's where, amongst others, is buried this man, Samuel Young MP. And you can see he's commemorated at the bottom, Samuel Young MP, born 26th February 1822 and died 18th of April 1918. So he was a right old age, well into his 90s. But in 1867, Samuel Young founded Young King & Co. And in 1874, their warehouse at Talbot Street, in other words, down the side of St Anne's Cathedral, held 1 million gallons of spirits for export. So you have him, a wealthy whiskey distiller and spirits, in this buried here. But you also have in this cemetery the founder of the Temperance Society. So there's a bit of a contradiction. I don't think these two were big mates. And we'll talk about the Reverend Edgar shortly. But Samuel Young, he was elected to the Westminster parliamentary seat of East Cavan in 1892, and he held this seat until his death at his home at 13 Derryvolgie Avenue in 1918, aged 96. And for a while he was the oldest serving member of the House of Commons. So that's the connection with Ireland. He was the long-serving parliamentary candidate, or Westminster candidate for, or Westminster MP for East Cavan. So, oh yes, and then another thing that might interest Sophie on this one, and you maybe have seen it before, so it's these guys in memoriam at the top are listed here. So they're not actually buried here. They're buried in Temple Cranny down in Portaferry, and then in Melbourne in Australia. And then below that line, it says Moulders here. So that's a very unusual expression. There's a song which Jackie always insists on singing. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. I'm not familiar with it, so I'll not be singing it. Maybe. Well, no, I just about managed the title. If you apply Jackie with coffee, caffeinated coffee in the doyen across the road afterwards, she'll sing it from start to finish. Yes, that's right. Well, it's nearly St Patrick's Day. Yes, nice touch. And then those guys who are mouldering here are actually buried here. This is very unusual. I only know of one other note that where it says Moulders here. It's in Clifton Street Cemetery, and it's also a Young grave. So that's the one in Clifton Street. And all it says is Young, ! Moulders here, 1829. He was quite an eccentric character, and all I would need to say was that he was a teacher in Inst, so that proves the point. So that's the Youngs. I think it's unlikely it'll come up in the test. Sorry to burst your bubble.
I'm going to try and use unusual words to trick the children.
Oh, right. Right.
Yeah. There you go.
Just for folks of a certain generation, you might remember Kelly's Coals. So that's the original Samuel Kelly there, that taller headstone there behind you. So Samuel Kelly then, it's his grandson who is perhaps best known. The Sir Samuel Kelly Eventide home is outside Hollywood, and there's a lifeboat down at Donaghadee named after him. It rescued the majority of survivors from the Princess Victoria disaster on the 31st of January 1953. That's a segue to a shameless plug of a book that I've written about the Princess Victoria disaster. And they're restoring that lifeboat down there in Donaghadee, previously called Donaghadee, but now of course you have to refer to it as Port Divine after that awful programme.
I love it. I never
What?
watch it. I don't watch any other
Never
soaps.
misses an episode.
I love it.
Where's the next season?
Really?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just really easy watching. It's simple.
It's like a Northern Ireland version of Neighbours. You know what I mean?
Do you not like to walk around Donaghadee and go, oh?
I do, but I don't like to. No, I like to walk around Donaghadee. Yes, but not spotting. Well, I have a good friend of mine, Robert Moore. Robert Neal. He's obviously not that good a friend. Robert Neal is. He does. I'm sorry in advance. He does Hope Street walking tours where you can see the.
Really?
Yeah.
Once I met a lady and she owned, I think it's the Port Divine house, and I think then they had to move for the next search, because I think she got fed up with it. She said she couldn't put on her washing machine at certain times of the day because she was in the back of it and they were in the front filming, you know, like
Right.
the police station. I think after a while did her head in, like, so.
Well, I normally say to people, although might regret saying it, that it's best like with the watch with the sound turned down. I think I lasted about even with the sound turned down. I think I lasted about 15 minutes before it went off. So the scenery's spectacular, but the storyline, I think it gets better, doesn't it?
Oh, it's just simple.
Well,
You know what's going to happen.
It's just simple. There's tune out, tune in. That's it.
oh, it's a bit simple like the Today's Tour, yes. So these are two Methodist ministers buried side by side. Folks from priests from a Roman Catholic background, well, obviously from a Roman Catholic, priests of the Catholic faith would tend to list some of their bigger gigs on their headstones, and they're quite grand headstones. Similarly, Presbyterians would tend to put, you know, their main gigs, so they would say, you know, where they'd served. Methodist ministers are a bit different, because Methodist ministers tend, especially in the early times of their career, they tend to serve 1 or 2 or 3 years in one place, and then they're moved on quickly. And so if you were to list each of their ports of call as such during their career, you would need huge headstones essentially. So often the Methodist ministers just put Methodist minister, as you'll see from Reverend James Donald, or in the case of Reverend Frederick Elliott, he hasn't anything on his headstone to say that he was a Methodist minister apart from the Rev. So we'll just talk about the Reverend James Donald first. He was born in 1812 in Hillhall, in other words the back road to Lisburn, and in 1836 he was appointed to teach in a school in Stonewalls in County Cavan. He was deeply moved by the terrible epidemic of cholera in 1832, so he entered the Methodist ministry in 1837. He served for a year in Donegal, a year in Pettigo and Ballyshannon, in other words, both down south, then a year in the barony of Erris, which is way over in the west of Ballycastle over in County Mayo, Tipperary, then to Donaghadee for a year, and then Boyle, again just across the border, Brookborough, so County Fermanagh, Lotherstown, I'm not sure where that is, but I think it's south of the border, Larne, we're trying to get rid of Larne to the south, but it's still in the north at the moment. Rathmelton up in Donegal. And then he was there for 3 years. All the other was really 1 or 2 years. Then he did 2 years in 1850 in Castleblaney and Monaghan, 2 years in Lurgan, 2 years in Downpatrick, a year in Dromore, 3 years in Newton Limavady, which is up in County Derry, and then 3 years then in Rathmelton, 2 years in Moville. You still with me? A year then in Dromore, 3 years in Castleblaney, 3 years in Macrofelt, 2 years in Youghal, County Cork, and then he did 3 years in Octorard, out near Clifton. So this is the church that he served in Octorard. So in other words, in Connemara, my favourite neck of the woods, and it's now away. But the Reverend Donald served there, as did the Reverend Elliott, and then he did 5 years in Dromore, County Down, and then 11 years in this church. Anybody recognise this church? It's not down south. Anybody here go to Queen's and probably drove past this every day?
University Street, is
No, it's University Road. Yeah, I think so. It's just opposite where the Tesco is there, on the way up to the university. So it's now derelict, sadly, but it was originally a Methodist church. So that's where the Reverend Donald served, and he was living at 3 Camden Street, in other words, quite close by when he died on the 18th of February, 1893, aged 80. Next to him then is the Reverend Fred Elliott, and he entered the Methodist ministry in 1843 in Killaloe, Ennis and Kilrush, sorry. Then he did a year in Skibbereen, a year in Clonus, 2 years in Kerry and Bearhaven Mines, 2 years in Kinsale, 3 years in Manor Hamilton, County Leitrim, 2 years in Lotherstown, 3 years in Ballinasloe, 2 years in Westport. So they're all south of the border. Then he did 3 years in Lurgan from 1860, 3 years in Donaghadee, then Port Devine, and then Armagh 3 years. And then went back down south again, 3 years in Tullamore, a year in Arklow, 3 years in Ballinasloe, 3 years in Octorard in that church that I showed you, and then 3 in Kinsale, 3 in Adair, 3 in Limerick, and he died 1902, aged 84. So he served the huge majority of his career down south of the border, but he's buried here.
Then, Peter, remember?
Well, yes, that's true. Yes, in provinces other than Ulster, is that fair enough?
No, some of them are in Ulster.
That's true. Manor Hamilton, yes. So. Well, okay, I'll cut. The
Fans that team that says the Causeway was in the wrong county. Remember? No,
no.
I'm going for goal. You got it wrong.
All right. The late great Henry Kelly. So my point is that the majority of where Reverend Elliot served was in the southern part of this island. So next one's down here, not too far. So it's the final burying place of this man, Sir William Porter MacArthur, and he is commemorated here as Lieutenant General. So he was born on the 11th of March 1884 off the Belmont Road in East Belfast, but as a child he showed a keen interest in the Irish language and became a fluent speaker. In 1906, he learnt the Irish language on holiday up in the Gaeltacht in County Donegal. In 1906, whilst at Queen's College, which is now Queen's University, he became the founding member and first president of the college's Gaelic Society. So these days we tend to think of Irish speaking as being the preserve of perhaps one side of the community as opposed to the other, but that wasn't always the case. MacArthur was keenly interested in the Irish language, and you'll be even more amazed, if possible, by what he did subsequently then. From 1938 to 1941, he served as Lieutenant General and Director General of Army Medical Services. So he was the head of the British Army in the lead up to the Second World War, in terms of ordering supplies. So you have this guy, a fluent Irish speaker from East Belfast, and such a senior position in the Allied war effort. However, he struggled with the demands of such a complex role, and he retired from active service with ill health in 1941. His specialism as a medical doctor was tropical medicine, as he served as the president of the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene from 1951 to 1961. He was also the King's physician for a short time, and he died 30th of July 1964. His wife's a very interesting lady. She's only one of 2 centenarians, in other words, people who lived to over 100, and she's also the most recent burial in this place. So you can see she's called Therese MacArthur Nian Telmy, and she was from Mauritius, and when she passed away on the 8th of May 1996, she's the most recent burial that we know of in this cemetery. So that's the MacArthurs. Next one's down here.
That Kelly one, Kelly Cole, rivals of my father.
Oh yes, that's true. And sorry to mention it. Jackie, is that Killen there? Cook, sorry. So this book here Written by, this features Henry Cook. His subtle and understated grave is behind you here. And but this, amongst the contributors to this book was the man buried here to the fourth headstone to your right, the Reverend WD, stands for William Doole Killen. And he was born in Ballymena and first ordained at First Rafo Presbyterian Church in Donegal. And that was one of the earliest congregations in Ireland. And he was ordained in 1829. He was the secretary of the First Presbytery until 1941. He was involved in controversy with both the Roman Catholic and the Church of Ireland churches in his defence of Presbyterianism. As a result of his efforts, in 1841, he was appointed as the church's chair of church history and pastoral theology, a position he held until his death. He succeeded Henry Cook, who's buried there. So the two are buried literally within a stone's throw, which might have been an appropriate thing, of each other. And he succeeded him as the president of the Presbyterian College and was the first principal of the Presbyterian Theological Faculty of Ireland until his death. Amongst his published memoirs, published works, he, as well as the Book of Sonia, he produced the memoir of John Edgar, and again we'll call it the Reverend John Edgar's grave shortly. So the next one's over here, but just have a look at Henry Cook's grave, because is he one of the two co-founders of this place, and he is better known these days as the Black Man because of the statue outside Inst. He didn't approve of Inst. He described Inst as a bastion of liberalism and a seminary of Arianism. So, so famously, he's burying his backside essentially to Inst. That's why he's turned his back on Inst. So, but the Black Man, that Black Man is what colour? It's green. So it's not black. The original Black Man was to a man called one of the Chichesters, in other words, the owners of Belfast back of yesteryear. But that was moved then into the City Hall, where it still stands under the main rotunda, and before it was replaced by Henry Cook's statue. So Black Man isn't black, and probably these days you'd have to refer to him. You get into all kinds of trouble calling somebody the Black Man.
And when did he die? So what age is this grave from then?
Well, the point about Henry Cook's grave is that it doesn't mention his wife. Now, his wife had 13 children, and that didn't even warrant her obviously no TV. It didn't warrant her a mention on his headstone. But so his dates are around the far side. So we'll go and see the dates now, because I can't remember.
It's so modern compared to the other. It's very square.
It is, yeah. It's very, very unusual.
It's the Ark of the Covenant.
More blocky, isn't it? It's more like a big block.
I confirm it's not the Ark of the Covenant. He was born, I have a photographic memory. So he was born on the 11th of May, 88, and died 13th of December, 1868.
Quite an unusual grave in here at that time, if you think of all these Victoriana type things, and then there's this big square, sort of 1970s brutalist.
Well, yeah, it's 1870s maybe, but yes, so it definitely does stand out. It definitely has the wow factor, but as we'll see shortly as well, maybe the Reverend Mackenzie's doesn't. So even though he was the co-founder, it was. I could talk here for a good while, you know. So there's one of these over the other side of the grave. That's a man called Reverend Josias Leslie Porter, is the one on the other side, and he was Cook's son-in-law, but also his biographer, an ex-moderator of the Presbyterian Church. So he's just commemorated on a very similar thing to this. So you know, for someone who held such a vital role, it's very kind of standard. It's just very understated, is the word I'm looking for. Headstone. This one here is the next one then. Another minister. Sorry if you're suffering from Presbyterian minister overload, but It says here, erected in the memory of the late David Hanson, for nearly 5 years a beloved pastor of York Street Presbyterian Church, who died 8th January 1865, aged 41 years. He died quite young. York Street Presbyterian Church was destroyed in the Belfast Blitz in 1941, and but on the 16th of March, how appropriate, 1847, David Hanson was ordained in Ballybay Presbytery in County Monaghan to assist and then succeed the Reverend Richard Ross in Drumkeen in the same county, and he remained there until 18th August 1854. Whilst at Drumkeen, he involved himself in the struggle for tenant rights for small farmers. The campaign had the objective of giving legal status to the 3 Fs of the Ulster custom. Relax, the 3 Fs are fair rents, fixity of tenure and free sale. At a tenants' rights meeting in Ballybay on the 11th of January 1848, David shared the platform with Catholic priests and other ministers. After one such meeting in 1848, he was badly beaten. In May 1850, Reverend Henry Cook, in other words that man, raised his concerns about the tenant right campaign and referred to, quote, perfect communist interpretations from ministers within their own body, close quote. It was a thinly veiled criticism of Reverend Hanson. In other words, the man who's buried here, again within a stone's throw of the Reverend Cook. And Reverend Hanson was living at Bellevue Place in the Crumlin Road when he died on the 8th of January 1865. So that's another connection to south of the now border. And interesting that the 3 of us, William and I and another guy called David went touring around Ireland, and he is now the Presbyterian minister in Ballybay. So next one's behind here. Just watch your footing here on these branches here. This is Jackie at her work as usual. So this very fine, unusual headstone was designed by a man called W.J. Barr. He was a well-known architect in Belfast, and so he also did headstones. The only other headstone in a similar style to this is at the back of Knockbreda Parish Church, up near what'll always be Supermac. Now some modern day people, deluded people, call it Forest Side. But
Leslie Forest Side.
Oh yes, sorry. No offence to anyone. But it'll always be Supermac to me, a bit like how our shopping centre will always be Wilco.
And the roundabout at the top of Castlereagh Road is always going to be the roundabout at the top of Castlereagh Road.
Even though it hasn't been there for a while, yes.
I know.
How long has it not been there?
Well, I don't know. If I'm telling people where I live, I say, go to the roundabout at the top of Castlereagh Road. So I'm stuck in the past.
Well, nothing wrong with that. But he designed many things in Belfast, like the Albert Clock, for example. But he also did a few headstones. And this is to this man, John Creary Ferguson, and that's him pictured there. And he was a prominent doctor. You can see that he amongst the places where he served at Queen's University and also at the Belfast General Hospital. He died in 1865, but before he died, in November 1827, at the Dublin General Dispensary, he became the first person in these islands to hear the human fetal heart. So he probably used something like this to do that when he did that in Dublin. So quite a notable doctor. He was also the president for a short time of the Ulster Medical Society as well. So. But say the first person in these islands to hear the human fetal heart, and it happened in Dublin. So we're going to go back out into the path here. Oh yes, I forgot to show this to Jackie earlier. I was tidying these graves, and you can see that I saw the one to the right. That
Falling away.
Yes, but has it fallen though? Because I thought it had fallen off the top. the one to the right, but then there's one to the left as well. So I think it was always like that. Those are the supports, and then there's been something across the top of it as well. So, but I don't. I can't see where that's gone. This guy here, just as an aside, his profession was, Jackie, a cochineal planter. So a cochineal planter is.
Hold on. This may put your son off eating Smarties.
All right.
Oh, aye.
Do you like Smarties?
It's a colour.
It's a colouring, yeah. So what is it? It's a
They're bugs that are crushed down
Cochineal.
and put into the as colouring.
They break
Into
up the
food colouring.
beetles and the
Yeah.
They
grind
get
it up
colouring.
into the colour.
So anytime you eat a wee pink bun, you're eating bugs.
right. All right.
Chocolate and sugar.
You're prepared to take that risk, yeah.
I was hoping to steal his Smarties.
Come on, Sophie, this is your one. So this is the final resting place of this lady, a lady called Isabella Todd, and she's a leading feminist from back in the day, and her blue plaque is on Botanic Avenue, number 99. It's now where French Village is, but she was born in Scotland, I think in Edinburgh. But you can see here, and she's commemorated on the side panel here, it says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. And then, but commemorated here on the front of the headstone is her mother. And as you can see there, it's Todd with one D, and she was born at Monaghan just at the start of the 19th century, 1803. And she died at Belfast, 6th October 1876. And you can see there's a number of Bible verses there as well. So Isabella Todd's mother was born south of now what is now the border. So, but still in Ulster. So, if I was in City Hall this week, and there's a little display about a significant woman of Belfast, and Isabella Todd is the only one that has her own separate display. Just so she was involved with a lady called Margaret Byers, who's buried in the city cemetery, and Margaret Byers founded Victoria College, and this is the original Victoria College. You might recognise it now as the Crescent Arts Centre, again up near Queen's. So, but that was where Victoria College started originally. And so Isabella Todd was a prominent suffragist. Beside the headstone, the Todd headstone, then there's one of 3 Commonwealth war graves that are in here. This guy here was serving with the Canadians, so that's why the Canadian maple leaf is on the top of the headstone. Interestingly, and it's nothing to do with Ireland or St Patrick's Day or whatever, I was in Belfast City Centre yesterday, and I noticed that a coffee shop in Upper Donegal Street is now not serving Americanos, it's serving Canadianos. So long may it continue. So just the next one's this big tall grave here. There's a couple of references to Ireland on it. So just be careful when you're going over the grass because we're not insured. No, we are insured. Just be careful anyway. So, and another interesting story that somebody told on a tour previously was that they were brought up in one of these houses behind, and in fact their mum and dad were hanging out the window waving at them and stuff at this girl when she was on the tour. But she said that I think they moved in there before this lady was born, and then so the mum, she wanted to buy a house on the other side of the street. It's called Weston Drive because it overlooked fields in those days. And then the husband said, no, buy on this side because you're not going to have any trouble with the neighbours. And so it proved, because as you'll know yourselves, the other side of that, is all totally